I've been doing art or creative stuff for most of my life. And most of the time, if you're trying to make something creative, you start with a plan. You've got a goal and you've got a way of getting there. And so you put your plan into action and you make the thing you're trying to make, hopefully. But then sometimes something else happens, where in the middle of trying to make your thing, you figure out that there's another goal, one that could be better or more interesting or easier than the one that you had the first time. You get a whole new idea that you never had when you started your project. And then you have to make a decision. Do you stop what you're doing and go towards the new thing that could be better? Or do you stick with your original plan? And I've seen a lot of artists get really good ideas in the middle of doing something, but then not follow up on them because they thought they had to finish whatever their plan was. It seems to happen all the time. People ignore good new ideas because they have to finish whatever the thing they set out to do was. And the longer I do art, and the more time I spend around creative people, I think this is really what distinguishes really great artists and craftspeople from the ones that are only okay. The really great ones are the ones who can see a new idea and just abandon whatever their original plan was and go off in a new direction when they know it's going to be better. Wait a second. I'm not doing a very good job of explaining this. Let's start over. So this weekend is the Cleveland Flea Market, and it's this big outdoor hipster thing where you can stuff yourself with pierogies and pound down gin and tonics at 9 o'clock in the morning and nobody thinks anything of it. And you can also buy a lot of stuff like cool old junk and handcrafted things like furniture and pickles. I don't know, it's Cleveland, just go with it. Anyway, one of the vendors lets me sell stuff in their spot, so I thought we'd make something really good and try to sell it and make some money at the flea. And so a while ago, I found this old flash assembly at a secondhand store, and I bought it for like $5. And here's the idea I had. I thought this would make a really great desk lamp. It would be sort of industrial, kind of steampunk looking, but not the stupid kind of steampunk, which is just bits of metal stuck to old clothes. Something that was, actually cool and had an industrial vibe to it. I thought I could make that in a day or two and sell it for a good chunk of money. I started out with the ceiling fixture. It's one of the ones you can just buy cheap from Lowe's or Home Depot. And I just wanted it because of the metal surround, because it has that nice sort of brushed bronze look. It looks kind of old even though it isn't. So I grabbed that and stripped off all the components, all the insulation and everything. So I just had the piece that had the look I was going for. Then I found a piece of wood that was wide enough so I didn't have to glue anything up. I cut it round on the bandsaw, mounted on the lathe, and turned it into a perfect cylinder that would fit underneath that metal surround. I grabbed a second piece of wood, chucked that up on the lathe, and turned a bunch of different details and coves into it so it looked kind of fancy. So then the three pieces all just stack together into a sandwich like this. And they all fit together kind of seamlessly. And I stain the wood with this dark walnut stain so that all the colors work together. And the base is pretty much done. Here's what it looks like, more or less completed. So far, so good. And at this point, the rest of the project was coming into shape for me too. I had this idea that my lamp was going to be sort of one of these really adjustable desk lamps. So it would have a central shaft and then a boom arm coming off of that shaft. And the arm would rotate, it would pivot up and down, and maybe even extend and retract so that the user could get the light anywhere they needed it to be. And then at the end of the arm would be my awesome looking vintage old flashbulb reflector, looking all cool and chromed and everything. And I got all these ideas together and I was like, oh, obviously I'm an artistic genius. This thing's going to be incredible and sell for a lot of money. So I immediately went and started digging around in my scrap bin, And I was looking at bolts, pipes, any piece of round stock that I had. And initially I didn't look too closely at this old piece of black iron pipe because of all the bends and twists in it. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, oh, that would just add like more visual interest as the central shaft, and then the arm could be another long piece of pipe coming off of that. And then I found this piece of solid stock that fit in it pretty snugly, and I knew that would work as a pivot, so I was off to the races. But this is where things got kind of complicated. All of those desk lamps that can pivot and rotate and extend and do all those tricks, they tend to be made with a lot of custom hardware. And it's not just stuff you have sitting around in a scrap bin. Now, I've got some metalworking stuff, but nothing really complicated. I don't have a mill or a lathe. I've got a metal cutting bandsaw, a couple of grinders, a belt sander, and some hand tools. I have a welder, but the wiring in my current house doesn't deliver enough amps to use it. So right now I can't weld. So making this hardware was kind of complicated, and I don't think I really thought it through before I got started. I'll save you the whole process of what I went through, but I basically found some different pieces of stock on hand that sort of fit together, and through a combination of cutting, grinding, sanding, drilling, and riveting, I was eventually able to make this. And the good news is, it works. I was kind of happy with the way that it worked, but there is one sort of big problem with it. It looks like shit. I mean, it could be worse, and I was going for that, sort of industrial vibe, but really it just looks crude. It looks like it was done by somebody who didn't have access to the right tools and couldn't shape the materials the way they needed to. And this is where things started to get tough for me, and I started to kind of doubt the project. But then I thought to myself, no, it'll be okay. Just carry it through to the end. Get to the point where you get that reflector on there, that flashbulb reflector. Get to there, and that'll sort of make up for the shortcomings of the rest of it. So I kept going. So now I had to get the flash reflector attached to the arm. And on the original assembly, that was done with this adapter here, but that wouldn't work with the arm that I had, so I had to make a new one. I decided to make it out of walnut, mostly because, well, everything made out of walnut just looks awesome. So there were several more hours of tracing, cutting, drilling, and shaping to finally end up with this adapter here. And it works. It threads onto the pipe of the arm, it takes the socket assembly from the lamp kit, and then the flash assembly just slides into these two holes. The problem is it just doesn't look very good. The bright brass of the lamp kit clashes with all the dark colors and all the beat up look of all the other materials that I'm using. And the flash itself, the flash reflector, it wasn't designed to use a normal household bulb. It was made for a much smaller bulb. So a regular 40-watt light bulb, it doesn't fit very well. And you can see me sort of struggling to align everything and try to get it to look good, but it just doesn't. The whole thing still has that kind of slapped together look. And this is where the project really hit the rails. At this point, I was looking at it and thinking, the only thing that looks good is the base. The rest of it just looks amateurish. I can't sell this. I don't even want my name on it. Maybe I should just quit. And here's the point where I either had to change directions altogether or just scrap the project and walk away. And when I sat down to think about what was really going wrong with the project, it all came down to the flash reflector. It was the wrong size and wasn't working with the project, but I had gotten it into my head that it was the heart of the whole thing, and that nothing else was going to work if I didn't have this cool retro flash reflector as the centerpiece of the whole project. But what I was missing was that the parts I had already done were actually the good parts. The base looked good, and the shaft made out of the different bent pieces of black iron pipe, that was working really well too. What I needed to do was get rid of the idea of the flash reflector and go in a different direction. So if I rethought the project from the ground up, I realized that it didn't have to be a desk lamp with an arm and swinging and all that mechanical stuff. That wasn't necessary. I could still take the parts that were good and make another kind of lamp out of those. But I'd have to go back to the heart of the project and figure out what was good about it. And what I really wanted was that vintage industrial aesthetic. I wanted it to look like something that was old and kind of weird, but in a charming way. And so I tried to think about what other shapes could I use that would get me to the same place as the flash reflector. And the thing I finally hit on was old phonographs, which everybody associates with a really exciting, interesting, old-timey style. And it occurred to me that those are a lot like lampshades. And as soon as I figured that out, I had a whole new direction. So now the flea market is the day after tomorrow, so I don't have any time to screw around. I need to stay away from glues and finishes that are going to slow me down with drying time. I need to stick to batch processing my components and using mechanical fasteners. So I get out this big sheet of aluminum flashing that I've got. It's brown on one side and white on the inside, so it's the perfect material for this. It's also flexible and pretty easy to work with. I mark out the size that I need and cut it into 6 equal squares. And I take those squares, line them up, stack together, and screw them down to a piece of plywood. This way, when I cut them out on the bandsaw, every piece is going to be exactly the same and they'll all be perfectly aligned. Once the cutting is done, I clamp them down again to keep them steady and drill all the holes. I'm still keeping all the pieces together so that everything's going to line up when I take them apart and make the shade. Now I'll be honest, assembling the shade was actually a lot tougher than I expected. Once this flashing is cut into smaller pieces, it's a lot less flexible, so you really have to manhandle it to get the pop rivets in. At the same time, thin aluminum like this is really easy to crease by mistake, and if you fold it, you're never going to get that crease out. So I had to be really rough with it, but gentle at the same time. Yeah, not exactly something that was easy for me. Anyway, after a lot of swearing and fighting with it, I was finally able to get the shade together. I sanded down all the rough edges, and then grabbed a piece of aluminum stock and quickly bent it into a bracket. I ran to the hardware store, picked up a harp, installed that in the shade, and then assembled the whole thing. Now here's my final glamour shot. And honestly, I'm really happy with the finished product. It's not at all what I had in mind, but it looks good. It's interesting, it's different than anything that I've ever made, and I learned a bunch of stuff. Most important, instead of just wasting 2 days in the shop, I actually came out with something that I'm happy with. And I never would have made anything if I hadn't been able to change directions and try something different. Anyway, maybe this will help you the next time you're working on a project and it's not going the way you had in mind. Either way, thanks for watching.